It is with a great deal of both pleasure and pride that I again greet you. Good evening. The 130th Continental Congress is reconvened. Tonight's invocation will be provided by our Chaplain General, Pamela Peterson Bork. Mrs. Bork.
Madam President General, tonight's scripture is from Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4. The wisdom is a house built, and by understanding it is established, and by knowledge shall the chamber be filled with all precious and pleasant riches. Please pray in your faith and tradition as I pray in mine. Let us pray together. Tonight, as we celebrate our President General's project, The Next Act, Constitution Hall Restoration, we are filled with joy that comes from a huge project completed. Gracious God, we thank you for our President General's love of historic preservation, her vision and attention to detail. We are thankful for all the talented people who worked on this project, from architects to construction workers, from engineers to glassmakers, all working to restore Constitution Hall to the original plan of John Russell Pope. In 1926, at the groundbreaking ceremony, the daughters prayed for your special blessing upon the ground whereon our building would stand. At the hall's completion in 1929, the daughters dedicated this splendid building to you and to the inspiration of man. We pray that you will continue to bless this Constitution Hall and that this restoration will continue to inspire the daughters and members of the public who use this space. Amen.
I invite you to please rise and join with me from home in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now, let's together recite the American's Creed. Then join me in the first verse of our national anthem.
I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, a democracy and a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states, a perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity, for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and to defend it against all enemies.
And you may be seated. Tonight, we focus on our important mission area of historic preservation, and in particular, in a grand celebration of the restoration of our DAR Constitution Hall, a monumental shared achievement of which we should all be immensely proud. Now, we've been building a lot of suspense all week, showing you glimpses, but never quite the entire hall. This evening, we will share our progress and our pride in this undertaking. Not since 1929, at the dedication of this hall, has John Russell Pope's original design been experienced so holistically. For successive waves of renovations and replacements progressively changed our hall's look and, frankly, disturbed its harmony, appeal, and acoustics over decades of use. Now, not only have we together completed an historically accurate restoration, but we have also made ours a state-of-the-art performance venue, one that is breathtaking to behold. After years of planning and 14 months of construction, and thanks to your support, we tonight raise the curtain on what has become the most expensive single administration project in the history of our national society. But before we unveil the nearly completed restoration, let's take a step back to better appreciate not only the history of our historic auditorium, but also the women who dreamed, built, financed, maintained, and propelled her forward through nearly a century of support. Constitution Hall, a memorial to that immortal document, the Constitution of the United States, in which are incorporated those principles of freedom, equality, and justice for which our forefathers strove. With those words inscribed on its facade, the cornerstone was laid on 18th Street by First Lady Grace Coolidge, using the trowel with which George Washington had placed the keystone of the U.S. Capitol in 1793. The year was 1928, and setting the stage for DAR Constitution Hall to be so much more than just another building in Washington, D.C. Little more than 3 decades after its founding, the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution had already outgrown its original auditorium, Memorial Continental Hall. Leadership realized that a larger venue would be needed to fit the big dreams of the growing organization. Preeminent architect John Russell Pope was hired in 1925 to complete the preliminary designs for the new neoclassical building, and the Continental Congress of 1926 passed a resolution christening the new auditorium Constitution Hall as a lasting memorial to that great governance document. Fundraising for the $1 million project must have appeared daunting, but members, chapters, and states willingly stepped forward, pledging to purchase inscribed seats, boxes, and even cubic feet of dirt, and yes, even sunshine too. With firm faith in their ability to raise the necessary funds, the daughters gathered to see ground broken in 1928, and within just 1 year, they witnessed the completion of their colossal building. These obviously were women with a plan. For while the National Society needed the larger space to accommodate delegates at its annual Continental Congress, members also recognized the business opportunity of renting the auditorium for special events and concerts most of the year. And sure enough, the hall became the unofficial cultural center of the District of Columbia, and in fact, a national stage for all forms of the performing and literary arts. In those early years, Constitution Hall stage welcomed the world's most celebrated artists and historic events. The roster included impresarios, orchestras, choral groups, bands, and distinguished lecturers. The National Symphony Orchestra was founded at Constitution Hall in 1930 and called it home for more than 4 decades. The National Geographic Film Series was presented at the Hall for more than 40 years. Additionally, the world premiere of the renowned 1939 film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington was held at Constitution Hall. The audience included 45 real-life senators, 250 House members, and several Supreme Court justices. While it is often remembered for the fact that Marian Anderson did not perform here that same year, 1939, it is important to remember that she did sing here in 1943 and 4 additional times, including as the first stop on her farewell tour in 1964. Indeed, much important history has been made on this iconic stage. Constitution Hall earned its designation as a National Historic Landmark in 1985 for its significance in commemorating the history of the United States of America and serving as host to a variety of significant events. Most U.S. presidents since Calvin Coolidge have visited the Hall, as well as other nationally notable figures. In addition to music concerts and comedy shows, other special events in Constitution Hall have included television specials and game shows, such as multiple tapings of both Jeopardy! And Wheel of Fortune. The Horatio Alger Awards Ceremony and the Library of Congress Gershwin Prize for Popular Song have both held gala ceremonies in Constitution Hall for many years. Other unique special events have ranged from the largest naturalization ceremony ever conducted within the nation's capital to an international teen robotics competition. A landmark in the local community, it often serves as a memorable venue for high school and college graduations, as well as award ceremonies for multiple federal agencies. If someone lives in the metropolitan D.C. area, chances are he or she has attended an event in historic DAR Constitution Hall. A new chapter was written in the history of this landmark, with its complete closure for more than a year due to the pandemic. For the first time in its history, the hall went dark for an extended period. While a setback, the public closure allowed for a massive restoration of the hall to proceed, including an innovative overhead laylight project that will marry historic preservation with the latest in technology in order to replicate the original overhead laylight designed by Mr. Pope, but removed more than 7 decades before. Indeed, daughters are still women with a plan. And now it is time for the curtain to rise on the next act at DAR Constitution Hall. Clearly, our DAR Constitution Hall has stood witness to important chapters in American history and made plenty of her own. One of the most noteworthy events to have taken place here was our one and only movie premiere, the 1939 screening of the film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, starring Jimmy Stewart in the role of an innocent but well-intentioned everyman citizen who struggles to battle corruption here in our nation's capital. The movie's famed director was Frank Capra, who was in the audience that October night. I recently had the opportunity to catch up with Mike Canning, a local movie critic and author of the book Hollywood on the Potomac, to discuss Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and its world premiere right here on the stage of DAR Constitution Hall. Here is our conversation. Well, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to the stage of DAR Constitution Hall to hear a little bit more about our connection to one of the most amazing movies of 1939, an amazing year in movie history, because we have arranged for you to meet Mike Canning, who is the author of the terrific book, Hollywood on the Potomac. Is that right?
That's correct.
Let's talk about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the movie itself. So for those who aren't familiar, perhaps you're not as much of a movie buff as Mike is, and I'm consider myself a very modest amateur at it.
A buffet.
A buffet. I like it. Tell us the general premise, the storyline of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Well, this is a classic movie, Hollywood movie, of the little guy getting the big guys. A senator dies from the state of we don't know where, at the beginning of the picture, and the party, never named, is looking for a replacement. And then a young man, Mr. Smith, who nobody knows, he's a nobody in his hometown. The party bigwigs get together and said, this guy Smith, he's loved by people in his state. If we name him, we can manipulate him easily. So he comes to Washington an absolute naïf, just thrilled that he's got this chance, because he never would have believed it. He's probably 30 years old.
That's what's got to be in it.
What?
The Capitol Dome.
On paper?
I want to make that come to life for every boy in this land. Yes, and all light it up like that, too. You see, boys forget what their country means by just reading The Land of the Free and history books. When they get to be men, they forget even more. Liberty's too precious a thing to be buried in books, Miss Saunders. Men should hold it up in front of them every single day of their lives and say, I'm free to think and to speak. My ancestors couldn't, I can. And my children will.
And that's the rest of the story, is him trying to get a handle on Washington and figure out how it works.
So we're thrilled to play a small role in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, in that it was here at DAR Constitution Hall that the film hosted the premiere. So set the scene for us. What was that night like here at DAR Hall?
Well, it was an amazing night. It never quite had happened before. And October 19th of 39, same year the film was completed, the place was booked, and it was a private screening for the Congress, the journalists and covering the Hill and hangers-on, and other local bigwigs, and they filled this place.
Talk to me about outside the building. They do some really swanky special things. Is that right?
Because it was a Hollywood premiere,
Right.
they made it up with Klieg lights, focused, and they spun them around and scattered them in the sky. And then people got in, and everybody sat down, and there were a few words. The movie played, and the reaction is the interesting part. Everybody was invited, every congressperson. 250 from the House showed up, and about 45 senators. Capra himself sat next to a senator called Burton Wheeler, who he didn't really know, but I mean, they were chatting away. And Wheeler, even before the movie ended, became very sour. And he was one of the first to just bail out. Guesses were that maybe half of the attendees, who were congresspersons, left. And they weren't saying nice things.
Well, I'm not licked. And I'm going to stay right here and fight for this lost cause, even if this room gets filled with lies like these. And the Taylors and all their armies come marching into this place. Somebody will listen to me.
Can I get a quote from my book, which I don't have, letter by letter?
Certainly.
A critical reaction on the same night was from Senator Harry Truman of Missouri. And he wrote to his wife, that's whom he wrote to every day. She was back in Missouri, she hated Washington. But he notes that he went to the DAR along with cabinet members, advisors, and a lot of other senators. And his review was crisp but accurate. Quote, "It makes asses out of all the senators who are not crooks, but it also shows up the correspondence in their true drunken light."
I went up to see him. Senator, yield. No, sir, I will not yield. And and this same man, Mr. James Taylor, came down here and offered me a seat in this Senate for the next 20 years if I voted for a dam that he knew and I knew was a fraud. But if I dared to open my mouth against that dam, he promised to break me in two.
So how significant was it that our hall was chosen for this premiere?
Another option, but it wouldn't have been big enough, was the National Theater, which existed at the time. But it's, what, a third or so of the seats?
Well, we feel so fortunate to have been a small part of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and it really has been a delight to learn more about the film, more about its premiere, and more about your important work here in Washington. So, Mike, thank you so much on behalf of our members for what you do.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for being with us. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. I also hope that you will now watch Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Another notable premiere that took place in our historic concert hall was the founding and very first performance of the National Symphony Orchestra, which began on this very stage in 1931 and called it home for 4 decades before moving to the then new Kennedy Center in 1971. We congratulate the National Symphony Orchestra on its 90th anniversary. I am truly delighted to share with you now a recorded performance of the symphony to celebrate that milestone and our connection to this important cultural institution here in our nation's capital. Please enjoy this powerful performance by the National Symphony Orchestra of Mahler's Fifth Symphony, Movement 1, led by Maestro Jean Andrea Noseda. I hope you enjoyed that. We congratulate the members of the National Symphony Orchestra for 9 decades of outstanding musical performance, and we are honored to have been a part of their opening act. It's evident that DAR Constitution Hall became the epicenter of cultural arts and civic engagement here in Washington, D.C., but after nearly 9 decades of use and more than 500,000 visitors annually, our hall was in dire need of both structural repair and historic preservation, and hence the need to complete the next act. Since the last time that I addressed you from this stage back in June of 2020, our hall has undergone a massive renovation. From replacing the concrete subflooring to installing 96 tons of steel overhead, we have now nearly completed a monumental restoration. Here is a glimpse into the progress of our project since I showed it to you last June.
Seven years ago, this has been in the making. We figured out the vision that we should be restoring Constitution Hall and that we should bring back John Russell Pope's aesthetics and what it looked like back in 1929, 1930. So we did the lobby in phase 1, and then we did the stage front in phase 2. And now with phase 3, it's really the true culmination of the entire restoration of Constitution Hall.
This final wrapping of phase 3 is just really going to brighten the space, liven it up, give it new life. And I think visitors in the future will really appreciate the history of this space and how beautiful it really is. The existing structure of Constitution Hall consists of huge trusses to span this entire space. The concept behind what we did in the attic was we needed to improve safety for the workers and the riggers, put in tension rods, these really thick tension rods to tighten and strengthen the trusses so they could bear more weight. Then what we could do is come in with rigging beams so that they can hang all the equipment for all the productions that are required here.
Getting the material up here was as much, certainly, if not more work than actually placing it. The openings we made in these lay lights, we did not destroy any plaster to make a bigger opening. This is 83 tons of steel. You know, some of it had to come in almost vertically and then swing into place. They have to handle it more and continue to move it as it comes up.
Audio Jungle.
We figured out the vision that we should be restoring Constitution Hall and that we should bring back the aesthetics of the lay lights. So originally it was a lay light that was lit from the sky through a skylight and that provided natural daylight to the hall. We are bringing back that look of natural daylight by introducing LED lay light panels that are able to mimic natural daylight. They're all edge-lit panels about 2 feet by 2 feet. They're not perfectly square. And then we've layered them with little LED diodes to introduce stars. So not only can we mimic daylight, but we can also mimic starlight.
The effort was made to make sure that the starlight effect looked random, like a night sky. And so by taking these 8 or 10 designs and being able to flip them one way or the other, and then arranging them in a certain way, when you look up, we are hoping that it will not look like there's a pattern. So that's, and in fact, there's even some that have no stars, so that there are also some random empty spots.
The daylight is going to be stunning. It's going to be bright. You're really going to feel a sense of place. And then we also have the starlight mode, which is, you know, Constitution Hall at night in the evening, and they twinkle too.
So it's going to be a really amazing effect.
Audio Jungle.
In the Laylight, we've also restored the plaster around the perimeter. So that's all been cleaned and fixed and repaired. At the top of the tiers, we can see a frieze, and that plaster has all been restored. But what's also very special to this project is that we're reintroducing the wall sconces that were once there, that we can see in the 1930s black and white photographs.
The existing design by John Russell Pope included a significant acoustic design to have a really beautiful space. But over time, especially the curved ceiling, it was painted over, it got really dirty, and it really lost all of its acoustic qualities. When you paint over an acoustic absorbent material, the sound bounces off of it, and you get a lot of reverberation.
So the curved ceiling now is a stretched fabric over acoustical material, and the fabric is made to replicate the original colors as well.
Everyone knows about the existing historic state seals that come out for Congress. Those were actually restored and livened up and cleaned.
And what we wanted to do was be able to bring DAR to everybody else that attends performances here in the hall.
So each historic state seal was 3D scanned and replicated through acrylic with printed graphic on top of it.
Kind of a neat way to talk about DAR and bring DAR to everybody who doesn't know DAR, who just comes for performance.
We have this company here from Canada called Ducharme that is installing all the seats. And what they've been doing is starting out with putting anchors into the concrete and doing a layout prep of the area, and then just put all the pedestals in. And then they followed it up with the cushions, seat backs, and the seat bases. They've got 4 more truckloads coming with all of the remaining seat parts, as well as extra fabric for attic stock, etc.
The most recent chairs that were here on the floor and in the tiers were installed in 1997. They had fallen into disrepair. Most of the mechanisms didn't work. They needed to be replaced completely. They were not worth saving. And so what we've done is actually return the original shape of the chairs, the wood on the rear of the chairs, and most important, this fabric. Using photographs from the 1930s that were black and white and combining them with John Russell Pope's original notes about the color of the seating fabric, we've been able to reproduce that historic fabric.
Audio Jungle.
Carpet is an aesthetically pleasing element that we've added to the hall. It was not original. The design elements in the carpet are all carefully composed and brought together to create a custom carpet for DAR. The scroll elements, speak back to the scroll elements in the carpet in the lobby. And along the sides are rosettes and fluting, which at the top of the tiers around the perimeter is the frieze that has that same design with the fluting and the rosettes periodically. So the carpet really speaks to John Russell Pope's vision and DAR's vision as well.
The guiding principle of this entire project has been historic preservation. That is, of course, one of our primary mission areas in the Daughters of the American Revolution. We have worked to the very best of our ability to replicate the look and feel of DAR Constitution Hall as it was when John Russell Pope designed it in 1929. During the course of DAR's long and storied history, there have been so many women just like you who stepped forward, who agreed to empower our vision for a house beautiful. I thank you for helping us in this time and this place to play our role in the history of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Thank you for having made possible DAR Constitution Hall's next act. As you have seen, the scope of this project has been massive. Before we have the big reveal, allow me, as an old broadcaster, to share 2 commercial messages. First, thank you to the more than 28,000 individual donors who have helped us make this project a reality. From adopting seats and stars to buying sunshine and satchels, you are the rock stars of this performance. We have approximately $2 million left to raise in the final year of this administration in order to complete what has now risen to a more than $14 million project. So fair warning, I'm not giving up. We still have some rising and shining to do, ladies. Though we are close, we are not entirely complete. Secondly, delays, most often due to manufacturing lags resulting from the pandemic, have kept us from a final completion of every detail of the entire project. Unfortunately, however, the overhead ley light is one of those elements that is not completely finished. Nonetheless, I would estimate that the restoration is now more than 90% complete. And so, with great pride and tremendous gratitude, ladies, here is your new DAR Constitution Hall. Thank you for making all of this progress possible, and please join me in sharing a moment of gratitude to honor the women who went before us to build and to sustain this grand hall. We would not be here if it were not for their sacrifice and, frankly, their courage. They were indeed women with a plan. And women who executed that plan not only here at our national headquarters, but all across the country. Since our 1890 founding, Daughters have preserved and promoted thousands of historic sites, buildings, and commemorations. And here are just a few examples.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
While Daughters have passionately promoted historic preservation, we have certainly not been alone in this effort. So tonight we pause to honor fellow organizations that complement our efforts to commemorate chapters of American history in communities large and small as we work together, yet in our own separate ways, to raise awareness of our unique American heritage. For 70 years, the National Trust for Historic Preservation has led the movement to save America's historic places, for these are the places where our American lives, memories, and stories all began. These are the places that connect us to the past, anchor us to the present, and lead us into the future. The President General's Medallion is reserved for those who exemplify the spirit of the Daughters of the American Revolution through exceptional service to our nation and a commitment to historic preservation, education, or patriotism. It is a privilege for me to bestow upon the National Trust for Historic Preservation the President General's Medallion in honor of its 7 decades of preserving our American history. Here to accept on behalf of the National Trust is its Chief Preservation Officer, Catherine Malone France.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Malone France, Chief Preservation Officer at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and I'm honored and grateful to accept the President General's Medal on behalf of the National Trust in recognition of our more than 70 years of leadership in historic preservation in the United States. Personally, I'm pleased to be here because my paternal grandmother, Pauline Phillips Kelly Malone, was accepted into the DAR in 1921, just after she graduated from college. I was extremely close to my grandmother, and she taught me many important things. After I tossed a basketball to her underhanded when I was about 8 years old, she took me right out into the yard, and in her shirtwaist dress and sensible pumps, she taught me how to correctly and crisply chest pass a basketball. My grandmother had voted for the first time in 1922, the first election in which women could vote in Georgia. So she impressed upon me at every opportunity that voting is a sacred right and duty that should be extended equally to all Americans. And she also demonstrated every day the importance of actively seeking out ways to be of service to others. My grandmother had 2 granddaughters, myself and my first cousin, Phyllis Malone Porter, who has a long and distinguished record in the DAR in the state of Georgia. I'm also particularly pleased to accept this award because it provides an opportunity to highlight the fact that the historic preservation movement is distinguished as a social movement largely built and led by women since the 19th century. Please allow me to congratulate all of you for the DAR's recent restoration of the spectacular Constitution Hall as just one example of how you are carrying the DAR's rich legacy of preservation forward. I only wish we were there together tonight, and I look forward to visiting soon. The DAR, as you all well know, was founded by women who felt that the stories and the places associated with them and their ancestors were largely left out of the celebrations of the country's centennial in 1876. The founders of the DAR worked to expand the places that our country considered important and worth preserving at a time when they themselves were excluded from most professional fields and were denied the fundamental civic right to vote. But against those odds, they began to tell a truer history, and their efforts played a critical role in catalyzing a historic preservation movement across this country. Today, there are still many places and stories that are left out of what our country preserves and reveres. At the National Trust, we are in the midst of our campaign for Where Women Made History, to highlight and protect the places and stories of all the women who have shaped us into the nation we are today and continue to lead us forward. We are doing this because the historic places that we collectively value and preserve still represent only a tiny fraction of women's contributions to this country. The same is true of historic places associated with people of color. Our African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund at the National Trust is the largest effort ever undertaken in support of historic places that represent centuries of African American activism, achievement, and resilience. These places are central to our understanding of American history, and their meaningful and equitable protection, elevation, and activation is critical to the future health of our society. Recently, we were honored that philanthropist Mackenzie Scott recognized the power of this work with a $20 million gift that will continue to expand and sustain the important work of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. The urgency of this work to preserve the places that tell the full, true history of our country was so evident in our recently released annual list of America's 11 most endangered historic places. That list included the tunnels built as a part of the Transcontinental Railroad that were excavated through the Sierra Nevada mountains primarily by men who had immigrated from China and who did this work under unbelievably harrowing circumstances. The list also included the Trujillo adobe in Riverside, California, a 150-year-old adobe that represents a multi-layered history illuminating important connections between Mexico, Spain, and the indigenous peoples of Southern California. These places are at risk, and if they're lost, we lose not only the truths of our shared history, but we lose the powerful places where we can work together to build a more just and equitable future. Just one example of this took place recently at Montpelier, one of our National Trust historic sites. Today, the property is owned by the National Trust, but it was of course the home of President James Madison, his wife Dolly Madison, and the more than 300 people who were enslaved by the Madison family there. On June the 17th, 2021, in a first ever milestone for museums and historic sites that are former places of enslavement, the Montpelier Foundation, which operates the property, voted to approve new bylaws that establish equality in the governance of the property with the Montpelier Descendants Committee, an organization that seeks to identify and create bridges to the living descendants of the African American women and men who were enslaved at Montpelier and elsewhere in Orange County, Virginia. Achievements like this are so important because they remind us that preservation is not about freezing places in time, and they demonstrate that preservation, at its very best, is inherently hopeful work. Historic preservation is not actually about the past. It's about the future that we're building together. The ways that we collectively elevate, protect, and steward historic places and their stories are an important demonstration of our respect for each other's strengths, achievements, and legacies. I see the DAR's strong alignment with us in this work in your statement that you recognize that the United States of America was built on the promise of equality for all, and that we share an obligation to help our nation fulfill that founding promise. I don't know, of course, what was in your collective hearts as you wrote and released that statement, but perhaps a part of what you considered was that the fundamental idea of telling the full history is at the very core of the DAR's own history. Like me, I expect that many of you out there have grandmothers whose legacies you proudly carry forward. and that many of you also have daughters and granddaughters, nieces, and other women who you support and inspire. Such a chain of women is the very essence of the DAR, and it exists in families and institutions and communities all across this country. Stories, places, objects, and the value of their stewardship passed from one generation of women to the next. I don't think it is an overstatement to say those chains of women have been the most powerful force in the preservation of our cultural heritage. While the National Trust is very grateful to receive the President General's Medal, we are even more grateful that we are, all of us, together, writing the next chapter in the history of the preservation movement in this country. Looking towards our country's semi-quincentennial in 2026 and beyond, we have both a moral imperative and a tremendous opportunity to celebrate the rich, complex, intertwined, beautiful, difficult, and inspiring shared history of our country, and make sure that the benefits of preservation extend to all Americans. Let's continue to do that important work together. Thank you again, and good evening.
I thank you, Catherine, for being with us tonight as we honor the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We're so grateful for your decades of passionate preservation all across our nation. Meanwhile, the White House Historical Association has worked for the last 60 years to preserve and celebrate the President's House, a private nonprofit organization founded in 1961 by First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, with a mission to protect, preserve, and provide public access to the rich history of America's executive mansion. The association's efforts enrich public understanding of the White House and American history more broadly. Examples of its innovative programming include virtual symposiums on the First Ladies, a White House podcast, and even a bi-weekly history happy hour. Supported entirely by private resources, the association's formal mission is to assist in the preservation of the state and public rooms, fund acquisitions for the White House permanent collection, and educate the public on the history of the White House. Since its founding, the association has given more than $50 million to the White House in fulfillment of that mission. In recognition of exemplary achievement in restoration, preservation, and education, the National Society is honored to present the White House Historical Association with the DAR Historic Preservation Medal, created to honor individuals and institutions that preserve the great historic sites of our nation. Accepting is White House Historical Association President Stuart McLaurin.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm very grateful for the long-standing friendship of the Daughters of the American Revolution and our partnership on historic projects such as the recent commemoration and restoration of James Hoban's gravesite in Northeast Washington, D.C. The DAR has done so much in the name of historic preservation, and it's truly an honor to receive this award from your incredible organization. 60 years ago, President John F. Kennedy was sworn into office with Jacqueline Kennedy at his side. And while their tenure was cut tragically short, they left a permanent mark on the White House and its historic legacy. Even before she became First Lady, Mrs. Kennedy first visited the White House in 1941 with her mother, and she was dismayed by the lack of historical furnishings. She later commented that it looked like it was furnished from a New York department store clearance sale, and in fact, it was. You see, prior to the Kennedys, there was no White House collection. Renovations, redecorating had been sporadic, with funding depending on the whims of Congress and the interests and resources of whatever family happened to inhabit the house at the time. In Mrs. Kennedy's mind, everything in the White House must have a reason for being there. In her words, it would be a sacrilege merely to redecorate it. It must be restored, and that has nothing to do with redecoration. That is a question of scholarship. Well, today, thanks to Mrs. Kennedy, The White House has its own curator and curatorial staff. Now its furnishings and appointments are exactly to the standard that Mrs. Kennedy envisioned, the very best of America. And this is where the White House Historical Association comes in. The association collaborates with the First Lady and White House curator to undertake conservation and restoration projects for the White House collection. Recent projects include replacing the carpet in the diplomatic reception room. It was so worn from through traffic that it looked as if it had had a path cut down the middle. There was the reupholstering of the iconic silk walls in the Red Room, which had become so faded from sunlight coming in through the windows that it appeared almost pink on the western walls. And the restoration of the beautiful suite of French Belanger furniture in the Blue Room that President James Monroe contributed when he moved back into the mansion in 1817 after the burning of 1814. And here I have to give a special thanks to DAR for your loaning of your Belanger chair to serve as a historical reference for our conservation team. All of these projects and many, many more are done with private funding and no reliance on taxpayer dollars. In addition to our conservation and restoration work, we also provide funds for the acquisition of furnishings and decorative arts for the permanent White House collection. We also fund the acquisition of presidential china and the official White House portraits. To date, we have invested over $110 million in this work since our founding in 1961. Our mission is not simply the preservation of the White House, but also to teach and to tell its stories going back to 1792, when George Washington selected the plot of land where the White House stands today. We all know that the White House is a symbol and a story, not just the story of day-to-day events, those that White House reporters tell in their stand-ups and on the evening news. The White House is also the story of our nation's history, of its meaning and purpose, of all that continues to draw so many millions here from all parts of the world. It's the story that we all cherish and hope to pass along to next generations. See, Mrs. Kennedy believed that every piece of furniture, every detail in the public rooms of the White House should be of museum quality. And in fact, thanks in no small part to the contributions from the White House Historical Association, in 1988, the American Association of Museums actually accredited the White House as a museum. Today, in each of the ceremonial rooms on the state floor, you see the furniture, paintings, and architectural features that tell our nation's story. Mrs. Kennedy famously said, "The White House belongs to the American people." The White House is the people's house. It's your house. It brings our country together in a very special way. Well, we at the White House Historical Association are the trustees of a sacred legacy. We preserve the history and significance of the White House, not only for presidents and first families, but for the American people. Thank you so much to the Daughters of the American Revolution for this important and significant award on our 60th anniversary.
Thank you, Stuart. And it was a real pleasure to join with you to mark the grave of White House designer James Hoban earlier this year in concert with the Daughters of the District of Columbia. Thank you for that privilege. Many historic preservation projects involve bricks and mortar, tangible reminders of our history. Others are evidenced by historic plaques or commemorations. Some take the form of furniture, artwork, or cultural keepsakes that tell our collective story. But equally important are the histories passed down to us through storytellers, including those of the modern age who use traditional and new media to inform and remind us of the important chapters of American history. Few such programs have made more of a lasting impact than our next honoree this evening. For more than 3 decades, American Experience has been television's most watched history series. The program has been hailed as peerless by the Wall Street Journal, the most consistently enriching program on television by the Chicago Tribune, and a beacon of intelligence and purpose by the Houston Chronicle. On air and online, the series brings to life the characters and stories that have shaped America's past and present. Acclaimed by viewers and critics alike, American Experience documentaries have been honored with every major broadcast award, including 30 Emmy Awards, 4 DuPont Columbia Awards, and 18 George Foster Peabody Awards. The series received an Academy Award nomination for Best Documentary Feature in 2015 for Last Days in Vietnam. Premiering on October the 4th, 1988, this much-respected PBS documentary series explores American history one topic or person at a time. Its Peabody Award winners include profiles of FDR and Malcolm X, and such diverse topics as Nixon's 1972 trip to China, the controversy surrounding Citizen Kane when it was released, and the Battle of the Bulge.
One small step for man. Future ain't no guarantee. We're all just floating out at sea. We as a people will get to the promised land. Together we can go anywhere. Yeah, there's a place for us. Where only we can go. The torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans.
Tonight, we are honored to present the 2021 DAR Media and Entertainment Award to the PBS series American Experience. Accepting is the series executive producer, Cameo George.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be with you here today to accept the 2021 DAR Media and Entertainment Award. My special thanks to President General Denise Van Buren for being such a wonderful friend to our series, and to the entire organization for recognizing our work. American Experience has been producing and presenting stories on our shared history for 33 years and counting. It is television's longest running and most watched history documentary series. And as the show's newest executive producer, it is my privilege to build upon the exceptional storytelling that American Experience has come to be known for. Well before my arrival at the series last year, I considered it the single most important history series in the documentary space today. With an archive of nearly 300 films, American Experience has become a testimony to the events and characters that make up our ongoing national story. It's a library that not only enlightens and entertains, but it also serves as a primary resource to other filmmakers, journalists, educators, and students. The rigor, precision, and journalistic integrity we and our filmmakers bring to each and every story we tell serves as the foundation for, I think, one of the most exciting ways to engage with American history. In uncertain times when we are all craving context and deeper meaning, history helps us connect the dots and make sense of the world we're living in today. To me, it's a critical teaching tool, providing cautionary tales as well as blueprints for success. It is also an endless source of inspiration. Voice of Freedom, our film on the African-American contralto Marian Anderson, which premiered this season, is a wonderful example of this. Anderson was an artist first and foremost. She did not seek to become an icon of the civil rights movement, yet her pivotal 1939 concert at the Lincoln Memorial, initially intended for Constitution Hall, helped cement her as such. Having President General Van Buren discuss those events and acknowledge the past missteps of the DAR in our film was extremely important, not just for the historical record around Anderson's legacy, but in validating the experiences of African Americans at that time. While the DAR's decision to ban Anderson from performing at Constitution Hall was regrettable, it was that decision that led to what became a landmark moment in Anderson's career and a landmark moment not just in African American history, but in American history, period. As our society grapples with questions of equality, fairness, and representation, we have a responsibility to show that American history belongs to all of us, and we should all be a part of the telling and interpretation of it. Studying our shared American history helps us see that the issues we are facing didn't pop up overnight, but it also helps us see that the country has pulled together in tumultuous times before to find solutions to even the most seemingly insurmountable problems. For more than 3 decades, our series has sought to bring new understanding to the people, places, and events that have shaped our collective experience, those you're familiar with and many that you're not. And as American experience evolves, we will be increasing our focus on people who made history and have critically impacted our lives, but aren't well known. Several of the films in our current season portray individuals who did not set out to become American heroes, but did so anyway. People like African-American World War II veteran Isaac Woodard, whose bravery and courage in testifying against a white Southern cop who viciously assaulted him led President Harry Truman to desegregate the United States military. Or one of my favorites, the brilliant Elizabeth Smith Friedman, a poetry-loving Quaker housewife who secretly worked as a code breaker for the American government and brought down a Nazi spy ring. Woodard, Friedman, and so many others became catalysts for change and catapulted our country into a new way of being, not because they wanted attention, but because they wanted justice and they believed in the greatness of America. Their stories remind us that individual lives can be transformative. It's an empowering message in these very uncertain times. Now, more than ever, we need the critical context that only the past can provide. And what's heartening is that our audiences are seeking it out. Our documentaries provide a first step in engaging with the history that informs our present, and we're proud to say that we continue that engagement across our digital platforms through original content and virtual events featuring some of the foremost historians and experts in the country, extending the historical conversation initiated by our films to the experiences that we contend with today. History is like no other discipline. It is a living, breathing study, taking on nuanced meaning and understanding as we age. It's what makes it exciting and what makes it the source of continuous debate, especially when we consider who is and who isn't part of documenting that history. We at American Experience are committed to enlisting content creators who represent the full racial, ethnic, gender, and geographic diversity of America to be part of all the storytelling we do. So thank you again for this meaningful award. We will honor this recognition with clear eyes and curious minds by continuing to do the work, documenting America's stories and hopefully helping our audiences to understand and appreciate more of the America we live in today. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameo, and our sincere thanks to all those at American Experience for enriching our lives and our appreciation for America's story with your outstanding series. I am so grateful that you joined us tonight to recommit ourselves to our important mission to preserve and promote historic preservation. That is to tell our American story so that future generations will better understand both our creation and our evolution as a people. What a joy to not only celebrate the grand restoration of our own National Historic Landmark, but to also share this evening with organizations that are equally as committed to preserving and sharing the story of our great nation. While our meeting is officially recessed until 1 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, I do remind our delegates to vote in the morning. We have important business to review tomorrow afternoon, and of course, no one would want to miss our National Defense Night scheduled for tomorrow evening. Thank you for your virtual involvement, and ladies, good night. For those who want to, you can now join me for the after party down in the orchestra section.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.